generation of mobility. My name is Nzinga Qunta. I'm a business news anchor in South Africa, and it's my great pleasure to be on this panel with Sophie Desormiere, the CEO of NAVYA, Dr. Maha, Achour, the founder and CTO of Metawave Corporation, Alexander Asseily, who's the vice chairman of Lilium, Matt Pearson, who's the founder and CEO of Airspeeder, and Peter Rawlinson, the CEO and CTO of Lucid Motors. Maha, perhaps I'll start with you. If you can just give us context into overall mobility transformation, where we've been and where we are now.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I would like you to think about mobility as a puzzle piece. And the puzzle being created by DARPA, which is the Defense Agency of the United States. The grand challenge created an image that autonomous vehicle can be done, can be achieved. This was almost 15, 20 years ago. Now, investment poured into that sector thanks to many leading universities, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and so forth, and this is where we are today. So there are two tracks to build that puzzle. Think about it about autonomous vehicle on the ground or in the air. Very happy to have a great panel today to go over that. But to make these puzzle pieces materialize and fit to build the image is very challenging. So whatever was 2010 or 2020 goals, now it's 10, 15 years from now. That's the reality. And the two tracks are defined by Google, Waymo, and General Motors Cruise, focusing on autonomous from day one, or what I call bottom-up, L2 plus to L4, driven by the software-defined vehicle, electrified with EV batteries, where the recurring revenue stream to car OEMs has to be software push over the air. There are no moving parts, there are no services, no parts to be replaced in this vehicle. So it has to be software, and software needs to exist with very robust hardware. And we're very happy to have Peter from Lucid, and of course, we all know the other players like Elon Musk from Tesla building that ground up, L2 plus to L4 for the consumer.
Alexander, Maha has just spoken about the challenges that come to when it comes to electric vehicles and transportation. Lilium is building electric aircraft. Give us context into that and the challenges that you faced in that journey.
Thank you. Well, electric aircraft are defined by really a complete shift in how an aircraft is pushed forward. So previously you have internal combustion jet engines, propellers, and now you're really being powered by batteries, the kind of batteries that would end up in some of Peter's cars. Except in our case, we're building a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So we're taking advantage of the benefits of electrification to build a completely new architecture where the aircraft can not only cruise at high speeds, like a typical aircraft, have low operating costs, like electric vehicles in general, but also because of this new propulsion system, be able to take off and land vertically. And aerospace is really quite a different world from tech. There's a lot of similarities if you're building a new aerospace company like Lilium. There's a lot of similarities to EV companies in terms of industrialization, in terms of battery supply chain and that sort of thing. But you've had this quite significant mountain to climb around safety and certification. And your aircraft last for much longer. The platforms last for 15 to 20 years rather than 5. So when you're designing an aircraft, you have to be thinking in terms of decades. How does this aircraft monetize over a lot of time? How do we have a supply chain that can keep it going? How do we get safety levels that are equivalent not to a helicopter, but to an aircraft that you would have flown into Riyadh, an A320, an A350. So the standards are very high. So the mentality is that of aerospace, more so than that of tech. And of course, the world it enables is phenomenal, right? You're talking about zero emissions, point-to-point regional transport. And that opens up a whole bunch of possibilities in terms of how people can get around, particularly in places like Saudi Arabia, where the plans are already happening for 2030 and 2040. How do we get people to the Red Sea? How do we get people around Neom? How do we get people out of Riyadh to various locales outside, either for entertainment or business? And where you don't have roads, where you don't have rail, electric vertical takeoff and landing jets in an environmentally conscious world are a perfect solution.
Alexander's talking about the future of electronic flight, Peter. It's also something you're thinking about when you're thinking about the future of electric cars. What do you see that as?
Well, I see the future being defined by a technology race with just a few players, because right now the move to electrification by many is conducted by using commoditized components off the shelf from the supply base rather than advancing the state of the art. What Lucid's all about is advancing state of the art, ultra high voltage, first car to have over 500-mile range. How have we done that? Through our in-house technology, advancing technology, and entering wholeheartedly the tech race that will define the EV of the future. And why is that important? Because we need to, first of all, prove that we can really address range anxiety with absolute range. We've done that with over 500 miles. But the second point is much more profound. It's how we do that to get the range with the minimum amount of batteries. That's the key, because anyone can stuff loads of batteries into an electric car. And that's dumb range. Anyone can do that. Double the number of batteries, you double the range. We don't want to do that. We want to double the range with a smaller battery pack. We can do that through technology, advanced technology. And why is that important? Because the battery pack represents today the biggest single money item on an electric vehicle. That's the big ticket item, the battery. And we've got to drive the cost of EVs down so that everyone around the world can afford to use EVs. That's how we're going to drive this transition to sustainable mobility, through cost. That's the big driver. The cost will come from using smaller batteries, and that will come from the technology race that we're entering.
Matt, Peter, speaking about that future of cars and electric vehicles in particular, what's the future of 3D transport and what is that?
Yeah, 3D, I think the challenge with all these autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles that we're getting is the way that it's modeled is these cars are going to be on the road a lot more. Cars today spend most of their time locked up in parking garages and parking spaces. So what happens when all of these additional cars are on the road? We're going to have to go three-dimensional. So we have to go into the air. Other people want to go into tunnels, which will happen as well. So you'll end up with ground cars that are on the road and underground, and then eVTOLs and aerial vehicles like Lilium. And there's a huge movement to vehicles that anyone can own and anyone can fly as well. And I think that's the next wave of the eVTOL movement. So getting there, I think, to Peter's point, getting there, we're actually very literally in a race. We've created a racing series for electric flying cars, because the big piece is what is going to move the needle on actually getting these vehicles into our cities is love. We fell in love with the car as a society 100 years ago, and we need that same excitement and fervor for the vehicles in the next phase. And that comes from things like motorsport, great showcases, great heroes contending with amazing technology at the cutting edge. And there's a reason that Henry Ford started as a racing driver, and Marcel Renault started as a racing driver, and the first Mercedes were racing cars, first Fiats were racing cars. All the vehicles that were starting 120 years ago and have lasted were all racing cars. So we're focused on building the love for 3D mobility and pushing the cutting edge of technology.
Sophie, so most of the panel has spoken about the future, what they imagine the future of mobility is. What do you think that is? And then how soon can consumers expect to experience this future of mobility that we've heard about?
In fact, NAVYA is a global solution provider of automated mobility for transporting people and transporting goods. And I think that the most important actions that we have to lead together is to answer to the market drivers. It means that we have a growing population, we have congestion in the cities, we have a lot of urbanization. We are talking here everywhere about smart cities, future projects, and zero emission. And my point is today we have to listen to what is requested. And having the ability as NAVYA to deliver mobility for transporting people, being inclusive and safe, and also transporting goods, because both are going together. You know, the consumer expects to be transported seamless in a safe approach, and at the same time, we need and we want to have access to everything by the logistics aspect. I think that mobility, autonomous mobility, will grow through this kind of value chain. And I will encourage and engage all of us to work on structuring this value chain, creating this right ecosystem in order to not only to have the technology, not only to have the building blocks, but having the services delivered to the consumer. And having said that, I strongly believe that it's about knowledge transfer, it's about knowledge expertise transfer, it's about having locally the understanding of the country and being customer-centric. You know, I heard yesterday that 65% of the supply chain has to be here, but 65% of the supply chain is also about people, expertise, and transfer of knowledge to create this new mobility.
Alex, Sophie's spoken about the very practical realities that need to happen. I just want to find out from an electric aircraft point of view, what are the opportunities and what's the gap between what the opportunities are and the reality in day-to-day life?
Like, how does it get deployed in real life?
Yes.
Great question. I also just wanted to sort of reinforce some important points, because I imagine that some of the audience here is probably trying to figure out how to decode this. Peter brought up a really important point, and actually both the gentlemen to my left, which is that you have to get a lot of these things off the ground, you have to get people to dream. You have to get people to fall in love, like you said. I think it's a very good point. Lucid has done that with their recent launch. Tesla did that many years ago. In other words, you have to sort of jolt people with like, this is what the future can look like. And then you have to follow that up with a cost-cutting measure that allows it to be accessible. Because otherwise you can't create an organization, a company that can go far. The same thing applies with deployment, to get to your question. So when we think, for example, at Lilium, we've built an aircraft that we think will really excite people. It's a sexy-looking aircraft. It's got a premium cabin. In other words, we want people to fall in love and also to be reassured by the safety of the aircraft. It's got 30 engines and so on. But then when we think about launching it, we've got to make the infrastructure appropriate for that aircraft year 1, year 2, year 3. So year 1, for example, what it would be is it would be private fractional ownership, so private owners flying out of small hubs, maybe to their own private locations, maybe to a resort. And as that type of operation becomes more established and you start to really work out the kinks of how these aircraft operate, then you expand. So our aircraft can land on any heliport, for example, but can that heliport does it have a charger on it? Is the charger fast enough? How many rotations can you get through that? And if you try and throw the kitchen sink at the problem year 1, which, by the way, with all due respect to our peers in the eVTOL sector, we all did this a few years ago. We're like, oh yeah, we're going to run zillions of flights a day. It's just not realistic. You've got to start with something realistic day 1 and then move up from there, move to the mass market as the cost of your batteries come down, as the cost of your units come down. And then eventually the infrastructure itself, people who invest in real estate, people who invest in ABB, for example, building our chargers, as the supply chain around that improves, then you will start to see, for example, around Europe, around Saudi Arabia, around the US, a whole bunch of airports, municipal airports, and heliports be capable of receiving eVTOL aircraft.
Maha, continue talking us through the practicalities and where we are going when it comes to the next generation of mobility.
Well, again, talking about mobility, you cannot decouple that from connectivity, cell phones. And you see a paradigm shift in how these cell phone companies are acquiring companies in the mobility sector. And you ask yourself why? Why will they pay billions of dollars to get into that ecosystem that we are discussing? Very simple. Just look at us. We're all glued to our cell phone. You get into your car, even if you trigger your autopilot in Tesla or in other EV vehicles, you're looking down on your cell phone. So we are seeing a paradigm shift in productivity. So I don't want the audience to think of autonomous as displacing the human driver. No, I think it's the autonomous is going to empower humanity to get to a level of education to drive that sector to the next level of this convergence between mobility and connectivity. So that's how I see the future.
Peter, can you take us back in time a little bit and talk to us about the journey and how far we've come in terms of electric vehicles, even as we're looking to the future?
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating because right at the dawn of the automobile, EVs were in a preeminent position. The very first Porsche was an electric car. And the great paradox here is that one of the reasons the gasoline car succeeded in that race was the advent of the electric starter motor, which made the gasoline engine easily started by all owners. I mean, it was everyday wisdom within the engineering community 20 years ago. Battery technology was not going to advance fast enough. The EV was never going to happen. And, lithium-ion batteries changed everything. And suddenly we had a threshold of gravimetric energy density and volumetric energy density that made an EV viable. But I think there is almost a myopia about batteries and the role of the battery in an EV. It's very much a systematic problem. The motor, the efficiency of the motor, the inverter, the switching, the voltage that the system runs at, the aerodynamics of the car, the mass of the car, the whole system holistically defines the advance of the EV. I think we're today where gasoline cars were maybe in the 1930s. There's a long way to run. We haven't seen anything yet. And paradoxically, I think that the EVs of the future will have less range, not more, because we'll have a more advanced and more complete charging infrastructure. And that will be the antidote for range anxiety. And if I knew there was in the US, I never get gasoline range anxiety because I know wherever I go, there's a gas station. If I knew wherever I go, there's a fast charging station, why do I need to carry the antidote for range anxiety on the car in this form of a huge battery pack, which costs a lot of money? So I think the future's going to be EVs which are smaller and lighter, with smaller battery packs, paradoxically less range, and I'm eternally optimistic about this bright future that we have. We're just in the 1930s now.
Okay. Sophie, when we're speaking about this bright future and all the potential that we've heard about, one of the big questions that's being asked at FII 6 is this kind of technology going to save humanity or help humanity in a really big way?
I think that all this technology will save humanity. At least I am optimistic that this technology will save the planet. Why? Because honestly speaking, with all this technology, we have a positive impact. We have a positive impact because we are developing technology which is about net zero emission, which is already a first step. Either you are electric platform or hydrogen platform, it's a positive impact for the humanity. On top of that, you are bringing new services with all the digitalization. We were talking about connectivity. It's the way also of keeping people in touch, being able to connect with their car, but connect to their car, but to the infrastructure, removing anxiety. It means bringing also societal positive impact, from my point of view, is key, not only, environmental impact. And I think that all these technology have a certain level of readiness. I can say that on NAVYA, we have more than 220 vehicles in 26 countries today, all over the places, delivering new services and really having a net zero impact because our platforms are zero emission, because all they are electric. And I think that we are ready for that. What is not ready is the ecosystem, the local partnership, and the structuring of the value chain. And if we want to be all the regions with these leading technologies in a broad sense, all various kinds of technologies, we have to collaborate together in order to be efficient with a high effectiveness to deliver these solutions in a structured manner, including the regulatory environment, to be sure that it will be a key enabler to accelerate.
Okay. Man, as we continue taking a look at the future of mobility, what's the impact of these new modes of transport on new cities as we also look at how we're going to live in the future?
Yeah, I mean, nothing to reach net zero, you know, and to kind of to save society. I mean, it's going to take so much, and nothing short of like a ground floor redesign of our modern industrial society. I do think transport plays a big role. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it defines what shape those cities take. And then I think that we can by designing these transport systems correctly, we can redefine, and I applaud what's happening in places like Saudi Arabia with things like the line, where you go, yeah, we want to redesign a city from the ground up, and we have an opportunity to do it right first time, and be a template for the rest of the world. And then I think the interesting thing, it creates opportunities for the infrastructure, either charging infrastructure or landing infrastructure in our case. Where are all these flying cars going to land? It's a real problem, and it's going to hold back the industry unless we design cities that are designed for 3 dimensions from the ground up. So everyone can own a flying car and it can land on your rooftop, and that's integrated into our daily lives in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of future I'm looking forward to, and I think as we build that, which is a dream that is so exciting, we have this opportunity to also do it correctly and build a net zero future, a city of the future that is, a profound shift, a ground up redesign.
So my next question doesn't have a particular person that it's directed at, and whoever feels best placed to answer it can. We're speaking so much about innovation and technology and how it's going to change our futures, but what happens, especially with innovation at this level, is that developed countries are able to progress much faster, with the example you've spoken about Saudi Arabia, the 2030, 2040 plan. Developing nations who are still battling with issues like clean water or education may get left further behind. And when we're thinking about humanity, humanity is not just the people who are living in developed nations. So what's the antidote to that, and what's the way to make sure that the technology that we've spoken about now is harnessed for those countries that may be left behind?
I'm happy to give that a shot. I think the big thing that we're facing now is developed societies have created a version of the future that's hugely fossil fuel dependent, and and we now are kind of sitting there going, well, anyone in a developing nation who just wants to achieve a reasonable standard of living, we're kind of going, oh, you shouldn't do that, don't develop. All the developed nations used fossil fuels and chopped down their forests and things to develop, but we're holding back the rest of the world, or kind of, it feels a little bit disingenuous to say, don't do the same thing because you'll screw up everything for us. And so I think what is really important now is to create a template of a future that everyone can aspire to, that is not going to do that, not going to be harmful. So it's about cost, and it's about making that accessible. So driving these technologies into mass adoption, so electric vehicles and electric transport is all accessible, but I think it's about creating that template. That would be really exciting if we had something that everyone can build to, that is not going to destroy the planet, and is accessible, and then we can kind of just lose this argument of like, oh well, no one can follow the same path that already industrialized and developed nations have followed.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so I just want to add one more thing, is that, again, I'll go back to connectivity and cell phones. Just look at in developing countries how banking has been transformed with cell phones, and infrastructure was set in place, like expanding on the platform that Matt is mentioning. So the same thing on autonomous, on electrification. I think the infrastructure is going to be mandated by governments, probably in the support of other developing countries as well. But we have to look at, again, I'll go back to my puzzle piece, because we touched on so many different topics, from cost, from battery, from infrastructure, from connectivity. We mentioned AI, sensor fusion, perception, which is basically the fuel, the engine that basically enable all these capabilities. And I'd be very happy to say the commercial sector now is far ahead of the defense sector for the first time in history. And again, because of the agility and how fast these industries are moving. So we see an acceleration in that. And I think the defense industry is going to try to catch up with the commercial. And the interesting part, when they converge, what's going to happen? I hope peace is going to happen.
We're about to wrap up our panel. Please may I ask, starting from Sophie and getting to Maha, you leave us with your final thoughts about igniting the next generation of mobility and what you'd like the audience to be left with. And if I can ask that it's 30 seconds to a minute so that we finish on time.
Okay, good. I think that we have to connect to create this new solution. It will be my point, because being able to deliver a real value chain in each country, offering new services in some countries, by the way, that you mentioned, opening new space for societal evolution will be my point. Connect to create this new value chain, to create our share of the future together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's about, for me, those showcases and starting in a methodical way, with these very future technologies, saying, yeah, we're not going to be able to bite off more than we can chew, and we're not going to move immediately into this future. All these promises about thousands and thousands of vehicles being produced in electric aviation, it will come, but there is a path, and that path has been laid out in the automotive sector for a long time. So for us, it's about getting people really excited, and that's why we've created Airspeeder as a showcase and something to say, well, we'll start with a racing car, and then a premium car, and eventually you get to mass market. But for us, it's about being realistic, and even though it sounds a bit wild that we can have flying racing cars and that will lead to flying cars in our daily life, it's actually a really pragmatic approach to vehicle development.
Peter?
So we started off with a relatively expensive high-end car, which is necessary to develop the technology, but moreover to establish a brand, a cool California-inspired brand. But we're going to go mainstream, and that's going to happen mid-decade with our world platform. And I want to be making 500,000 cars a year by 26, and aspirationally 1 million a year by 2030. That's how we're going to move the needle.
Powerful.
Exciting. Yeah, I mean, to echo some of the other comments, if you'd ask someone to predict the future of phones in 2005, they would never have been able to articulate the smartphone revolution that was kicked off by the iPhone. Edge-to-edge screen, apps, app stores, and all the things that come out of that, including things like Uber, for example. So what tends to happen in these seminal industries is you have someone with a dream, like the founders of Lilium or Peter, for example, who take technology, build it into a dream, and develop something that surprises everyone, that sets a new standard, like the iPhone did. And once that happens, that invites competition, because you get a lot of Me Too's going, oh, I can do that too. That invites commoditization, which drives price down for everyone. So to sort of indirectly answer your previous question, one of the ways in which smartphones have now made it into a lot of developing countries and have brought a lot of those populations up is through that process. And it's going to happen also with electric aircraft. In our particular case, we think that the aircraft we're building is the sort of thing people imagined would happen in 2050, and it's actually going to come out in 2025. And I think it's going to sort of unleash an avalanche of competition and exciting new products.
Thank you. Maha?
I would like to focus on young generation in my closing arguments here, as a mother of a Stanford professor who never owned a car, never drove. Independence was to be connected. Burden is to own a car. So this young generation is going to use mobility as a service, and it has to be safe, and it has to be secure. And I think that's the goal of all the panel here.
Sophie Desormiere, the CEO of NAVYA, Dr. Achour, the founder and CTO of Metawave Corporation, Alexander Asseily, the vice chairman of Lilium, Matt Pearson, the founder and CEO of Airspeeder, and Peter Rawlinson, the CEO and CTO of Lucid Motors. Thanks so much for your time and insight into the future of mobility. That's where we leave our conversation. Can I please ask for a round of applause of our panelists and their insights?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can get off the stage. Thank you.